Good morning, everyone. Really happy to have Erin and Carly here with us today from the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. I first connected with them a few years ago when we were trying to gather support from other watersheds and cities for the smart salting bill, or that's what we call it, the limited liability around salting. So curious to hear what's up with that, but lots of other updates on water related items in front of the legislature this session. So I will introduce our speakers and then turn it over to them. So thanks again for being here. So we've got Carly Griffith. She's the Water Program Director at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy and a PhD candidate in the University of Wisconsin-Madison Department of Geography. And Erin Klemz is the Chief Strategy Officer at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy and holds master's degrees in communication and advocacy and political leadership. Prior to his work at MCEA, Erin was the advocacy director for the Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. So I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll share we'll share our screen here in a second with some slides. We'll obviously give a kind of overview of what we're looking at the legislature, but we're open to any questions that you have about issues that you're confronting. And I will talk a little bit about the SALT bill because it's a big old mess, unfortunately. It would be nice to get something done there, but it's been a real struggle. And anything else you want to add before we start, Carly?
No, it was nice to present to this group last year and good to be back. And we will have some updates that follow up on things we talked about when we presented to this group last year, as well as some new things that have come up since then.
Yeah. Let's see, if I can get my screen to work, that'd be great. Yeah. So many bars.
Do you want to go over to the top? There you go.
Why am I completely losing the plot?
Here, let me hop in there.
You fix that, please.
I'm gonna drive the ship here for a sec. And then let's go to, let's get this out of the way.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Carly, for fixing that. Just quick words of introduction about who we are. MCEA is a nonprofit law firm and advocacy organization. We're actually celebrating not nearly exactly 50 years of our 50th anniversary this year, 2024. We use law and science to protect the health of Minnesotans and the environment we rely on. We have 28 employees currently in St. Paul and Duluth, Minnesota. We have 4 program areas, water program, obviously, today we'll be talking about that, but also we work on climate and energy, northeastern Minnesota issues, and our Healthy Communities program, which focuses on environmental justice. And in a sense, we're kind of unique amongst environmental groups that we engage at all the different levels where decisions get made in Minnesota at the legislature, when we make the laws, then the agencies that implement, create rules, and then implement those laws and enforce them. And then we have the ability to go to court to hold these decisions accountable to the law and science as it exists. Our contact information is here. I obviously don't scribble it down. We'll send you the slides when we're done, but we're Erin and Carly, and this is our contact info. And you're welcome to contact us anytime you like. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of the legislative landscape. As you know, the legislature came into session just on Monday of this week. And this is the second year of the biennium. And if you're not familiar with the legislature, this is what they would call a bonding session. Usually the second year of the legislative session is less intensive because the budget has already been passed. And that means that there's less emphasis on budgetary issues and sometimes more issues on policy, but also bonding. We expect a couple of things to be true this legislative session. One is that because there's very little money at the bottom line for general fund spending, there will be very few bills that cost a lot of money. And that means that a lot of laws that otherwise would be considered might not happen this session because of that. Secondly, and although I will say that just yesterday we got some updates from the Minnesota Management and Budget that indicates that we're about $300 million ahead of our collections from what they expected it to be. So there might actually be a greater chance that there will be supplemental budget bills. If there's not supplemental budget bills, there usually will be some kind of omnibus policy bill or something that comes out of these different committees that becomes a vehicle for some of the smaller changes that the committees are and authors are considering. The primary issue for this legislative session is a bonding bill. You may recall that last year we passed the largest bonding bill in Minnesota history, but that was largely due to the fact that there had not been bonding bills for 2.5 years prior to that, and there was a great backlog of projects. It seems like there's a fairly bipartisan consensus that a bonding bill of some sort will happen this year in the realm of $800 million to $1.2 billion, but all bonding bills require bipartisan support, and with very little other issues that Republicans in the legislature can rely upon as leverage, I expect that they will use their leverage on the bonding bill as to the maximum effect. And that could mean that it will come up right up to the edge of the session before we know exactly what a bonding bill will look like. There's lots of talk amongst leadership about fixing things that were passed last session. There was an almost unprecedented number of legal and legislative changes last year on a whole variety of issues. Whenever you have that many, you're going to have some fixes. For example, we're working on a very small fix for an appropriation that we helped get for the Hmong American Farm Association and their farm, and trying to fix things like they have the wrong number on the county road that's in the appropriation. So there's the things that are as minor as that, but also some political fixes. For example, the school resource officer issue that you're seeing pop up in the first days of the legislature. This is a shorter session, so we started here in February, not in January, and we will end before Memorial Day. I think the last day is scheduled to be May 20th. They could end earlier, and I think actually for the DFL leadership, they would like to end earlier than May 20th if possible. The last thing I'll point out is that basically the first part of the session is what I would call a sprint. This first 6 to 7 weeks until March 22nd is the key committee deadline. And so any bills that needs to get through a committee hearing and get approved by a committee have to get that done in both the bodies, both the House and the Senate, by March 22nd. So there's a ton of issues. We're not going to cover all these issues, all the issues about water. We're going to focus on these. Salt, public waters definitions, and public waters inventory, updates on forever chemicals, PFAS, manure management grants, which is related to our work on southeastern Minnesota's groundwater issues and drinking water crisis, and funds for private well mitigation, which is an issue that is popping up statewide and including in the metro. In the metro, it's mostly about chemical contamination like PFAS. In greater Minnesota, oftentimes it has to do with nitrates. And of course, anything else you'd like to discuss, and we'll leave a bunch of time for questions at the end. I'm going to talk about the salt applicator bill first, and then I'll turn it over to Carly for a number of these bills. The salt applicator liability bill is something I've really appreciated the involvement of this group in. As you know, chloride issues are growing in the metro, especially where we have the greatest amount of applied chloride and de-icers. You know that we worked together on a bill that was filed as HF 820 and SF 755 last session. Abby, I believe, testified in favor of the Senate bill in its first hearing stop. And one of the features of the legislative session is that the second year of the legislative session is a continuation of the first. And so those bills are all live. I mean, if the bill got heard before, it's still alive today if it wasn't already passed. And so HF 820 and SF 755 exist. The problem is that there has been significant tension with the Landscape Association, and then MNLA, it's the Minnesota, what's the N stand for?
I forget.
I don't know. But basically, this is the landscapers, and many of them do de-icing and winter maintenance as a side business or a part of their main business. They recruited Representative Hollins to do their own version of a bill without talking to the advocates or any folks at the watershed districts. And I think this bill is pretty much going to be DOA for a variety of reasons. One is that the standard of liability that it reduces to is not acceptable to a variety of stakeholders. And that's been one of the key sticking points over the last 7 years of working on this bill. Thank you, Minnesota Nursery and Landscape Association. I was trying to get the N right. And so there's been a little bit of a reorienting and reorganizing of the effort. You may be familiar with Sue Neeson from Stop Oversalting. She's a master water steward and has been really the citizen lobbyist leading on this issue. She continues to do that work.
The one with the teaspoon.
The one with the teaspoon and the 5-gallon bucket, exactly. And Michael Welch, who is an attorney who works for Smith Partners and I think represents a number of the watershed districts on this call, has gotten some funding to do some additional work at the legislature. It's not clear what that will look like right now. And so I wish I had easier answers and easier things that I could suggest for you to do to help, except to say to reach out to Michael, because I think he's doing some work right now with Sue. And also, if this bill is heard, we'd love to see testimony for it. Abby testified really well for it last session and the previous one as well. We expect this Hollins bill to probably languish because it doesn't even have a Senate author at this point. And I think that the MNLA was a little bit deceptive in how they recruited their author to it, and she recognizes that there's a problem here. So maybe this will be a spur for an actual conversation between the landscapers and the salt advocates. So far, that has not materialized. So we'll keep an eye on this, and if there are developments, let this group know about how you can get more deeply involved. Otherwise, my best suggestion is to reach out to Michael at Smith Partners and find out what's going on. And I'll turn this over to Carly then for Public Waters.
All right, well, I will jump in here to talk about a bill that we worked to introduce this session. The bill numbers are at the bottom of the screen here, House File 3385 and Senate File 3558. Our House author is Representative Purcell, and our Senate author is Senator Kunesh. So just as an introduction to this bill, there are two key ways that we define public waters in the state of Minnesota. There's one way that we define them, and then there's one way that we keep a record of them. So Minnesota statute defines a public water in 103G005 subdivision 15, which is there on the screen. And we also have a list and map of public waters called the Public Waters Inventory, or the PWI, which was created in the 1980s to be a resource to stakeholders, to landowners, and to document public waters across the state. However, the inventory, so this list and map, does erroneously leave off waters that meet the definition in statute of a public water. So some of these were deleted from the inventory in 2017 by an order of the Commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources. 640 stream miles were removed with that order. And the Department of Natural Resources has acknowledged that there are errors in the inventory, and they have committed to a court to systematically review these errors for each county and restore waters to the inventory as appropriate. State law also under 103G201 recognizes that there can be errors on the PWI and gives the DNR the authority to correct them. This bill also builds on a legal case that MCEA worked on for many, many years, and a September 2022 decision by the Minnesota Supreme Court that a specific water body pictured here in this image, Limbo Creek in Renville County, met the definition of a public water and therefore is a public water, even though it is not correctly listed as a public water on the public waters inventory. However, the court limited their decision to the fact-specific circumstances of this particular water body, and they specifically said that it is the duty of the legislature to clarify the relationship between the inventory and the statutory definition of public waters. So that is exactly what this bill does. It clarifies that it is the statutory definition of public waters that governs, regardless of whether a water body has been correctly identified on the inventory or not. This formalizes what is already the current internal policy of the Department of Natural Resources and ensures that all public waters in the state are protected. And the reason that this is important is we have permits and categories for environmental review that only apply to public waters impacts, but those tools are only effective if we correctly identify public waters across the state. And then just as a last note on this, we also strongly support efforts to make the inventory as accurate as possible. The intention of this bill is not to make the inventory obsolete, but just to clarify this relationship between that statutory definition and the inventory.
I'll add just one more thing, which is that there are also 3 other bills that have been introduced by Association of Minnesota Counties and other interests. I think a couple of agricultural associations as well, that kind of run the opposite direction, that would make the PWI determinative of what a public water is. And so this debate has already been joined at the legislature, and the bill that's being filed by Purcell and Kunesh is our response to that.
That's it for that one. Next slide, please. All right, so next I want to do some updates on our work on PFAS forever chemicals. So MCEA was part of a coalition of groups that worked very hard to pass one of the nation's strongest bans on the non-essential use of PFAS in consumer products last session. And now, post-session, the Pollution Control Agency has begun the process to develop rules for the non-essential use ban and to develop Class 1 water quality standards for PFAS in Minnesota. So MCEA, myself, and a team of our staff attorneys are closely involved in this process. And we will be there at the table. We will submit comments to the agencies. We will be there for the rulemaking to hold the Pollution Control Agency accountable to develop the strongest rules possible. This is especially important as industry shows up in large numbers and tries to carve out broad exceptions for classes of consumer products that they think the ban should not apply to. So, you can follow our newsletter for more updates as that process unfolds in really the years to come. It's going to be a long process. We also released an advocacy report in November of 2023 that is focused on PFAS in wastewater streams like wastewater treatment plant effluent and biosolids that are incinerated or land applied as fertilizer to cropland. So currently, wastewater treatment plants do not have the treatment systems they need either for incineration or for land application to remove PFAS. And in some cases, the wastewater treatment process can even increase the concentration of certain types of PFAS compounds in biosolids, for example. So this summer, what we did is we took water quality samples with an environmental chemist at the University of Minnesota. His name is Dr. Simsik. And we did find significant PFAS concentrations in wastewater treatment plant effluent discharge, as well as streams in watersheds in the St. Cloud area with high concentrations of biosolids land application. So, we've had a really recent announcement from the Minnesota Department of Health and the Environmental Protection Agency. They're both very explicit about the known human health impacts, in particular of legacy PFAS compounds like PFOS and PFOA. So while these legacy compounds have largely been phased out of current industrial production, they have been found at significant levels in soils and groundwater and crops and even livestock in states across the country tied to biosolids land application. So other states like Maine and Michigan and Vermont have started to take explicit steps through changes in state law to address PFAS contamination from biosolids, and it's time for Minnesota to do the same. So MCEA we plan to work with the Clean Water Action. They were one of the key players in the non-essential use ban last session, and we plan to work with Clean Water Action and other groups on a bill related to PFAS and biosolids in the 2025 legislative session. So to end here, I'll say that if you want to learn more about this particular topic, I would encourage you to read our advocacy report on our website or watch the webinar that I recorded with Dr. Simsik on our YouTube channel in November after the release of the report.
Just to add a little bit more about this legislative session, I know that this is going to come up, the issue of PFAS in the water supply is definitely coming up in terms of funding. There's a number of cities that have requested, I think Woodbury has a very substantial request for the bonding bill to install treatment for PFAS in their water facilities. And we're also looking at the possibility of a biomonitoring bill that would allow folks who've been exposed to PFAS to be reimbursed for the cost of monitoring their health, basically. I'm not sure how far that bill will go this session, but that's the bill that's the most likely to advance on PFAS this legislative session.
And so the way that this work, our focus on wastewater streams fits into that larger picture is as water utilities increasingly face really high costs, exorbitant costs to treat PFAS in drinking water, we want to really focus on source reduction to, reduce PFAS before it is discharged into water bodies that water utilities then draw from for drinking water. So next here, we have an update on the EPA petition for southeastern Minnesota. So in April of 2023, MCEA and 10 other organizations submitted a petition to the EPA to address groundwater nitrate contamination in the karst region of southeastern Minnesota. And this was under the EPA's emergency authority under the Safe Drinking Water Act. So the petition highlights the hydrogeological vulnerabilities of the karst region, where you have thin topsoil over fractured bedrock and a very close surface and groundwater connection. And it also highlighted the high number of private wells in particular that have tested above the federal human health limit of 10 milligrams per liter of nitrate. And I wanted to include this map on this slide. This is some of the latest data from aggregated well data and ambient groundwater data from the Pollution Control Agency. And it shows that southeastern Minnesota is the only part of the state with an increase in nitrate concentration trends in ambient groundwater data. So that includes springs and some wells. And that also the range of wells greater than the maximum contaminant level is in between 12.5% and 25%. It's actually 16% of wells have tested above the maximum contaminant level for nitrate in the latest data. So in November of 2023, the EPA sent a letter to 3 state agencies, the Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture, and the Pollution Control Agency. And their letter had a really clear message that there is an evident need for further action to safeguard public health in the karst region of southeastern Minnesota. They further outlined 7 criteria for immediate public health measures that need to be taken, in particular to address risks to private well owners. And they also talk about state agency accountability for longer-term prevention. They said that the state agencies need to use all of the tools available to hold the sources of nitrate pollution accountable. And they recommended changes to the general feedlot permit and to technical standards for the land application of animal manure and commercial fertilizer for the karst. So we got a state agency work plan in response to the EPA letter this past month in January, and it outlines a 3-phase approach. Phase 1 and phase 2 focus on public health intervention and respond to those 7 criteria for immediate public health measures. That will be led by the Department of Health. And phase 3 focuses on prevention and restoration. That will be led by the Department of Agriculture and the Pollution Control Agency. And given the expertise that we have within MCEA, that 3rd phase will be the focus of our ongoing work on this issue. We think it's incredibly important, not just to address these immediate public health measures, but also to really get serious about groundwater protection and restoration, not just for current water supplies, but for future water supplies.
And I'll just add a little flavor to that, which is that the phase 1 and 2 measures, a lot of conversation is going to happen in the legislature about how to fund those. There's definitely a large tranche of money from the Clean Water Fund, the legacy funds, that's going to be devoted to this work. We have some questions about the constitutionality of portions of it, but it's really heartening to see how much there's been a serious response and recognition that it's going to take quite a bit of resources to resolve this problem. We didn't get here quickly. It's going to be a while for us to fix it as well. I think I found a 2001 report that I think Representative Hansen, the chair of the Environment Committee, posted on his Facebook page that described the problem of nitrate contamination in southeastern Minnesota using the exact same terms we're using today, and that was 23 years ago. So it's been a long time coming for a response, and we're excited to see the response of state agencies based on the EPA, after being prodded by the EPA. It took a little bit of external pressure, but I think we're seeing some positive movement after that.
So I will just jump in on two more points here. So there's another bill that we've worked to introduce this session. The numbers are at the bottom of the screen there for to establish a manure management or a Bowser grant program to enhance groundwater protection and reduce greenhouse gas emissions for ag that is focused on cost share assistance for manure management and storage facilities, and also cropland retirement through conservation easements in vulnerable areas or karst feature buffers like sinkholes to try to protect some of the most vulnerable areas in the karst from nitrogen heavy inputs from commercial fertilizer and animal manure. And we have added prioritization language to that grant to prioritize applicants that comply with the land application requirements for permitted feedlots in Minnesota. And that really gets to the heart of the issue of how do we reduce risks for groundwater contamination through best management practices for land application. I will just briefly say here that this issue is tied not only to groundwater protection, but also surface water runoff and fish kills in the karst region. And there was just a fish kill prevention report that was released in this past month, January, that specifically talks about the need to increase manure storage capacity to help prevent fish kills. So, I'll just, to end here, I'll say the karst region has approximately 2,600 feedlots. So there's a real high density of animal feedlots in a really vulnerable hydrogeological region. And only a very small percentage of those are permitted by the Pollution Control Agency and required to have 9 months of manure storage under their permits. So what this really does is it tries to provide cost share assistance for more feedlots to increase their manure storage capacity so that they can follow best management practices for land application that reduce the risk not only of groundwater contamination, but can also reduce, in some cases, certain practices can reduce greenhouse gas emissions too. Next slide, please. And then just to touch briefly on this, Aaron also already gestured at this, but one really important aspect of the EPA petition is the fact that private well owners have none of the regulatory protections that people on public water systems have. So we have an obligation, given the extent of groundwater contamination, not only in the karst region, but in other areas like the Central Sands and southwestern Minnesota, to provide resources to help private well owners, one, test their water supply to see if it's safe, and two, have access to some support if they need to treat their water supply or replace their well. So I think what I want to highlight here is that it's really important to have a permanent fund source. In Southeast Minnesota alone, the anticipated financial need is from 40 to 60 million, according to the Department of Health estimates. And we think that it's appropriate for a permanent fund source to be tied to one of the primary causes of nitrate contamination. And state agency research pretty definitively shows that commercial fertilizer is the largest source of nitrate contamination in groundwater in areas like the karst. And I just want to say this is an area where Iowa is actually ahead of us, which we don't usually like to say. But in this case, in 1987, Iowa established a grants to counties program based on a fertilizer fee that provides grants to local county health departments to give financial assistance to residents for private well water services. So we think that this will be an issue with a lot of discussion at the legislature this session. We think it's really important to have a permanent fund source for private well mitigation. And we think that a fertilizer fee would be an appropriate base source for that fund.
Adding a little bit more to that, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is also separately seeking to create a new fund for private well mitigation related to contaminants of emerging concern, primarily PFAS. And they don't really have plans to fill this fund basically with enough resources to deal with what is certain to be hundreds of millions of dollars of need, quite honestly, once this is all said and done. Obviously, having a place where there's a fund that's actually dedicated to that purpose, though, is important. And we're exploring also whether it's possible to create similar kinds of containers for funds, whether they come from a variety of sources. But providing a permanent place for us to both have places for people to come to get resources that are needed, but also when they're empty, it's an incentive to actually find new ways to pay the bill, basically. We have a lot of resources on our website. You are welcome to use them under mncenter.org is our website, and under How We Win, we have a tab called Shaping Policy. There's a separate tab under there that has a bill tracker that I just updated yesterday. So it is ready to go with what bills we're tracking at the legislature, including just links to what the bill is, but also if we have fact sheets, resources, or testimony on that bill, we post it there as well, and you're always welcome to use it. It's under How We Win, Shaping Policy, or there's a direct link here as well. And we'll be sharing these slides with you after this presentation. You can just click on that link. Last thing I'll mention is that we have an upcoming legislative webinar. We're a member of a group called the Rise and Repair Coalition, which is a coalition of climate justice and indigenous groups working on climate justice and indigenous rights issues at the legislature. And I'll be joined by Juventino Meza of Rise and Repair for a webinar on March 5th at noon. And those are always free, and you can register for it under news and events on the MCEA website. It'll probably be up later this week, to be honest. It's not there quite yet, but it will be very soon. And it's always a good chance to check in, that'll be a good time to check in on what's happening at the legislature, because there'll be about 2.5, 3 weeks left before the deadline. And that's usually when, well, things get really interesting at the legislature. So you're welcome to join us for that webinar as well. Otherwise, thank you for your kind attention. We'd be happy to answer any questions you've got about the issues we talked about or anything else that is on your mind. And thank you so much for your kind attention. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Aaron and Carly. Anne, did you want to moderate questions, or you want me to? I guess I will. Emily, do you want to just go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I know it's not water related, but I've heard about the extended producer responsibility bill for packaging. I'm wondering if you know anything about that.
I know something about it. Not a lot, to be perfectly honest. We have not been involved in the EPR work. My primary work in the mid-session, between the sessions, has been on electronic waste, not so much on the packaging waste side of things. We know that one of the challenges here is that it's connected to other work that MCEA is involved in regarding the Hennepin Energy Resource Center, and our desire to see that retired as soon as possible. I think everyone recognizes, of course, that waste is not something that just goes away. If you close a facility like that, you have to find another place to deal with it. And so there's been a lot of back and forth between Hennepin County particularly and other counties that also have waste to energy facilities, talking about alternatives to burning and landfilling. The packaging waste is one portion of that. And so I think, the one thing I've heard recently that's a little bit concerning to me is that some of the counties have started to attach, well, particularly Hennepin County wants the passage of this as a condition of closing the HERC in the long term. We obviously want to see the reductions in waste, and particularly organic waste and electronic waste, packaging waste as well. But I'm not an expert on the EPR work that's related to the packaging bill. I do know that it has a wide variety of co-sponsors and looks likely to advance this legislative session, but I don't have much more to say about it beyond that. Sorry, I can't be more helpful.
Thanks. Other folks have questions. You can either indicate in the chat or put your hand up or just turn on your mic.
One other thing I will mention as you think of if you have any questions for us is we will be partnered with CURE and Lake Pepin Legacy Alliance to do a town hall in the Mankato area on March 23rd. So right after that first deadline to talk about water issues in the Minnesota River Basin. We will have some focus on drainage and drainage impacts, but that's not all that we will cover in the town hall. And Dr. Carrie Jennings at Freshwater will be there as a speaker. I will speak about the public waters protections and some issues related to a change in the federal definition of waters of the United States. We'll have a couple other speakers as well. So I would really encourage people, if they're interested in Minnesota River Basin issues, to attend that town hall.
Last chance for questions or comments.
We answered all your questions?
Yes, so that was awesome. Thank you so much, both Carly and Aaron. That was a fantastic presentation, and glad to hear about all the water related stuff moving forward. So that's great, and disappointed about salt, but see what happens.
Yeah, and you have our contact info if other questions come up
Fantastic.
after this.
Yeah, come on down and see the show at the legislature. It runs between now and May 20th. And if you're thinking about coming down, feel free to ping me. I'd be happy to show folks around if you're not familiar with the Capitol complex. But thanks again for your work and for having us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. And I will, again, once the recording is done, I'll be posting the recording as well as the PowerPoint presentation that was shared today. So everyone will have access to that. All right.
Great. Well, I'm off to the rotunda to attend the rally. So I will see you all later. Thanks again so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for all your
you.
work.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll wrap up a little bit early this month. Maybe get a little bit of time back. But it was really great to hear those updates. And we will see you all next month. Have a great day, everyone.